The commissary on Herath Station had been designed by someone who believed, perhaps optimistically, that shared meals would generate shared goodwill among a population drawn from 14 different worlds, 3 corporate fleets, and 1 diplomatic delegation that had been arguing about parking allocation in Docking Bay 7 for the better part of a year. The ceiling was high and vaulted in the way of spaces that are trying to suggest cathedral without committing to the theology. The food dispensers ran along the eastern wall in a row of cheerful efficiency, offering nutrition in the honest, unpretentious sense of the word, sustenance that kept the body functional while making no particular promises about enjoyment. The lighting was warm. Someone had hung plants near the upper windows. The overall effect was of an institution that had tried very hard and landed somewhere in the vicinity of adequate. Princess Ellie had been eating lunch in this room for 4 months, and for 4 months the radius around her table had maintained itself with the quiet, self-organizing precision of a system that required no central coordination. It was not a posted rule. It was not, to anyone's knowledge, a formal policy. It was simply the kind of understanding that a population arrives at collectively when the relevant information has had sufficient time to circulate, passed between shifts in the corridor, mentioned in the particular tone people use when conveying something important while pretending to convey something casual, absorbed and filed, and acted upon without discussion. She was sitting now with the composed patience of someone who had made peace with a situation she had not chosen, working through a portion of something the dispenser had labeled, with considerable confidence, as roasted grain pilaf. It was not roasted. It was not, in any meaningful sense, a pilaf. She ate it anyway because the alternative was not eating, and she had tried that approach in the early weeks and found it philosophically unsatisfying. Her skin was very white, not pale in the ordinary human sense, but white in the way of old starlight, carrying its own faint luminosity in the filtered glow of the commissary's carefully calibrated warmth. Her hair fell dark and straight past her shoulders. Her ears rose to long, elegant points beneath it, a feature that would have read as strange on a face less absolutely still, but which on her face read simply as one more thing about her that was not quite of this station, not quite of this ordinary Thursday. She held her fork with the particular care of someone performing a mundane action while thinking about something else entirely. The table beside her, close enough that 2 people sitting there would have been, by any reasonable measure, in comfortable proximity, was empty. So was the one behind her. So was the semicircle of floor space that a physicist, had they been inclined toward sociology rather than physics, might have described as a field of active avoidance, a region where the ordinary statistical distribution of human bodies had been quietly, consistently, and very specifically not occurring for 117 days. Samuel came through the dispensary line at 12:43, carrying a tray that held the pilaf, a bread roll that had the structural integrity of a small architectural feature, and a container of something amber that the menu board had described as harvest tea, with the confidence of an entity that had never harvested anything. He was looking at the bread roll with the expression of a man making a preliminary engineering assessment. He had been on Herath Station for 4 days. He had spent 3 of those days in the lower maintenance corridors, which smelled of recycled air and rubber sealing compound, learning the station's ventilation network with the thorough, methodical attention that his work required. He had spent the 4th day writing a report about the ventilation network that he suspected nobody would read. He was hungry in the practical, uncomplicated way of someone for whom hunger is currently the primary fact of experience, and when he looked up from the bread roll and scanned the room for somewhere to sit, he applied the same practical logic he applied to most things. He identified the nearest available seat and walked toward it. He set his tray down, pulled out the chair, and sat across from Ellie with the easy, unself-conscious efficiency of a man completing a simple task. He looked at his pilaf. He looked at his bread roll. He picked up the bread roll, tapped it once against the edge of his tray with the quiet curiosity of a man conducting an experiment, and then set it down and said, to no one in particular and yet clearly out loud, "I don't think this is bread." Ellie looked up from her pilaf. This was not, in itself, a remarkable action. People looked up from their food regularly in commissaries across every station and settlement humanity, and its various neighbors had managed to establish in the last 2 centuries of enthusiastic expansion. The looking up was ordinary. What was less ordinary was that she looked up because someone at her table had said something, which had not happened in 117 days, and the part of her that had quietly stopped expecting it needed a moment to process the fact that it had occurred. She looked at him. He was looking at the bread roll with the focused attention of someone who had asked a question and was waiting with genuine patience for the evidence to weigh in. He tapped it against the tray again. It produced a sound that belonged more to the category of ceramics than baked goods. He nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had suspected but had wanted to verify. "I've had bread on 9 different worlds," he said, still addressing the roll rather than her, "and I want to be clear that I'm using that number to establish credibility. This does not behave like any of them." Ellie was still for a moment in the particular way she was still when she was deciding something. Then she said, carefully, as though testing the weight of ordinary words after a long time of not needing them, "The dispensers on level 3 are calibrated for nutritional output rather than texture." There was a memo. He looked up at her then. His expression was not the expression she had learned to expect, the careful neutrality that people produced when they had been briefed and were performing the management of their own reactions. It was simply the expression of someone who had received new information and was incorporating it. "A memo," he said, "about the bread." "About the structural composition of the carbohydrate units," she said. The word bread was used loosely. He looked back at the roll. He looked back at her. "I appreciate the honesty," he said. "I want to file a complaint. Who receives complaints about the structural composition of the carbohydrate units?" Something moved at the edge of her expression, not quite a smile, not yet, but the faint precondition of one, the way a room changes slightly before the light comes on. "The station administrator," she said. "She has a very full inbox." He picked up the roll, considered it with the philosophical resignation of a man making peace with his circumstances, and bit into it with the commitment of someone who had decided that structural inadequacy was not going to defeat him. The commissary around them had reached a state that could only be described as collectively held breath, conversations continuing at their normal surface, while something underneath had gone very quiet and very alert, the social equivalent of a sensor array that had detected an anomaly and was waiting for additional data. He chewed for a moment. "It's not bad," he said, with the careful honesty of someone revising their expectations in real time. "It's just not bread." "That is the station's general approach to many things," Ellie said. He laughed, a short, genuine sound, unperformed. The laugh of someone who has found something actually funny rather than the laugh of someone observing that humor has occurred. She watched him with the focused attention she brought to anomalies, because that was what he was, an anomaly in the precise scientific sense, a data point that did not conform to the established pattern, and therefore warranted careful observation. "Samuel," he said, and extended a hand across the tray in the old human way, the gesture so natural and unthought that it arrived before any social calculation could have produced it. She looked at the hand for a moment. Then she took it. Her hand was very cool in his and very still, and she shook once with the precision of someone who had learned the custom from description rather than practice. "Ellie," she said, "is the pilaf also a loose interpretation?" He asked, releasing her hand and looking at his own portion with renewed suspicion. "The pilaf," she said, "is optimistic." He tried it. His expression performed a series of small, rapid adjustments. "Right," he said. "Okay." He tried another bite with the determined expression of a man who has decided that adequate nutrition and personal dignity are not mutually exclusive, even if the evidence is currently suggesting otherwise. How long have you been on the station? 4 months, she said. Does the food improve? She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The sauce on Tuesdays is genuinely acceptable, she said finally. Something to look forward to, he said, and meant it, and returned to his pilaf with the equanimity of a man who has decided that Tuesday is not so far away. And Ellie, who had not had a Tuesday to look forward to in a very long time, found that she was eating her own meal with something that felt, cautiously and without announcement, like company. The Tuesday sauce was, as promised, genuinely acceptable. Samuel had arrived at the commissary at 12:41, 2 minutes earlier than the previous Thursday, which Ellie noted without acknowledging that she had noted it, because noting it would have required admitting that she had been paying attention to the time in the particular way one pays attention to time when something is expected rather than simply elapsed. She had been at her table since 12:30, which was also something she did not examine too closely. He came through the dispensary line carrying his tray with the comfortable familiarity of someone who has made a separate peace with the food situation and is no longer entering negotiations. He had the Tuesday sauce. He sat down across from her, looked at the sauce with the expression of a man preparing to be genuinely surprised in a positive direction, tried it and said, "You were right. This is real." "I have no reason to mislead you about the sauce," she said. "I'm choosing to take that as a broader personal guarantee," he said, and she found the corner of her mouth making a decision without consulting the rest of her face. They had, in the days between Thursday and Tuesday, passed each other twice in the corridor, near the environmental systems junction on level 4. Both times Samuel had said something unremarkable. Once about the air recycling unit that had been producing a faint smell of something he described as aggressively mineral, once about the observation deck, which he had finally visited and found worth the walk though smaller than advertised. Both times Ellie had said something back. Both times they had continued in their respective directions. It was nothing. It was also, by the precise mathematics of her recent experience, everything. Around them, the commissary had begun a slow and reluctant process of recalibration. The radius had not collapsed, people were not, in any sudden or dramatic way, sitting closer. But the collective held breath of the previous Thursday had released into something more like watchful uncertainty, which was a significant upgrade. 3 people at the table nearest to them had a conversation at normal volume. This was progress. Ellie had decided not to find it amusing, and had then found it amusing anyway. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel said, moving through the Tuesday sauce with the focused appreciation of someone who has been eating food of questionable ambition for 5 days and has found an exception. "You have been asking me things since we met," she said. "The format of the question suggesting you want permission is new." He acknowledged this with a small nod that conceded the point without surrendering to it. "Fair. I was going to ask about the ears." She looked at him with the level attention she gave things that required her to decide, quickly and accurately, what kind of thing they were. He was looking back at her with the open, direct expression that she had come to understand was simply how his face operated. No performance of casualness, no careful positioning, just a person who wanted to know something and was asking. "They are longer than human ears," she said. "I noticed," he said. "I didn't want to not notice out loud if that makes sense. It seems ruder somehow." It did make sense. She found with mild surprise that it made considerable sense. "They hear better," she said. "Broader frequency range. I can hear the conversation that table is pretending not to be having about us." He glanced at the table. The table immediately became very interested in its food. He turned back to Ellie with an expression of genuine delight. "What are they saying?" "The one in the gray uniform believes you are either very brave or completely uninformed," she said. "The one beside him has taken a position of scientific neutrality and is waiting to see what happens. The woman at the end thinks the whole situation is," she paused, "and I am quoting directly, extremely her business. Samuel considered this. I respect the scientific neutrality position, he said. What do they think is going to happen? Nothing specific, Ellie said. There is a general understanding on this station that I am. She considered the precise architecture of the next word, particular. Particular, he said. It is the polite version, she said. What's the impolite version? She looked at him steadily. Dangerous, she said, with the flat, unembellished honesty of someone who has decided that the word deserves to be said plainly rather than handled. She watched his face for the thing she had learned to expect, the small recalibration, the micro-adjustment, the moment when information about her landed and rearranged something. His face did the thing where it received information and incorporated it. Then he tried the pilaf, found it as it always was, and said, dangerous how specifically? Because I've been in the ventilation system on level 6, and that seems like the more immediate threat to my personal safety. Ellie looked at him for a long moment across the table, across their mediocre food and the acceptable sauce, and the station that hummed around them with its 14 worlds and its parking dispute, and its carefully maintained distances. I require blood, she said, precisely and without decoration. Right, he said. He tried the bread, which was, structurally, no better than Thursday's. Does the station provide that, or is that a bring-your-own situation? The station had a medical bay on level 2 that stocked synthetic blood compounds for 3 different species, which Ellie explained with the calm precision of someone delivering a briefing, which was, Samuel was coming to understand, how she delivered most information, complete, unembellished, and with the particular quality of someone who has long since made peace with the facts and is simply conveying them. The compounds are adequate, she said. They are formulated by a pharmaceutical subsidiary of the Herath Corporation that has, to their credit, prioritized accuracy over aesthetics. The packaging is aggressively clinical. Does the packaging affect the experience? Samuel asked. She considered this with the seriousness she brought to questions that didn't expect it. Less than one might think, she said. It was Thursday again. They had arrived within 4 minutes of each other, which had stopped being coincidental sometime around the second Tuesday, and had become instead the kind of quiet, unannounced arrangement that 2 people construct without discussing it. The way you build something structural without ever formally agreeing that a structure is what you're building. The commissary had continued its slow recalibration. The woman who had declared the situation extremely her business had, in a development that Ellie found genuinely interesting, moved to a table closer rather than farther, a fact she had not mentioned to Samuel because she was still deciding what to make of it. How long has it been a requirement? Samuel asked. He was working through a bowl of something the dispenser had categorized as vegetable soup, which was accurate in the sense that vegetables had, at some point in the supply chain, been involved. Since I was 17, she said. It is a condition of my specific biology rather than a general feature of my world. My mother does not share it. My brother does not share it. I am, in this as in several other things, an anomaly within an anomaly. That sounds lonely, he said, without weight or performance. The way someone says a true thing when they're not trying to make a point with it, but simply cannot see the use in saying something less true. She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when something had arrived that she hadn't fully prepared for. It has a learning curve, she said finally, which was, she recognized even as she said it, the most honest answer she had given anyone about it in a very long time. Samuel nodded. He did not follow it with reassurance or with the specific variety of optimism that people sometimes deployed in the direction of difficult information, the kind that was really just a request for the difficult information to become less difficult so that everyone could be more comfortable. He simply nodded, in the way of someone filing something carefully, and then said, "Is it ever a social advantage? I feel like on certain planets it would be an enormous social advantage." She looked at him. Which planets? I'm thinking of at least 3 in the outer belt, where the ability to make a room very quiet very quickly would be considered a significant leadership quality, he said. The room being quiet out of fear and the room being quiet out of respect are different rooms, she said. Still quiet, though. Samuel, I'm making a structural observation, he said, with the expression of a man who knows he is on thin ice and has made a considered decision to stay there. I'm not advocating for the fear-based leadership model. I'm just noting that your skill set has range. The soup, which had been providing a neutral backdrop to the conversation, chose this moment to reveal a piece of something that was either a root vegetable or a component of the station's water filtration system. Samuel examined it on his spoon with the expression of a man who has stopped being surprised, but has not stopped cataloging. He set it aside on the edge of his bowl with the careful placement of evidence. My people, Ellie said, watching him do this, have a word for someone who finds everything interesting. It does not translate well into standard, but the closest approximation is something like, a person who has not yet decided what to be afraid of. Is that an insult on your world? He asked. It depends on who is saying it, she said. My grandmother used it as a compliment. My first diplomatic attaché used it as a warning. Which am I getting? He asked. She looked at him across the table with the focused attention she had been bringing to this question, in various forms, since the first Thursday when he had sat down and said something about bread. The table around them held the quiet evidence of a shared meal. His soup, her compound, the bread that remained structurally problematic, the Tuesday sauce which had, unfortunately, not extended its jurisdiction to Thursdays. The commissary hummed. The woman who had moved closer was eating with the concentrated attention of someone who was absolutely not listening. I have not decided, Ellie said, which was honest, and which was also, she understood, the first time she had told someone that a decision about them was still open, still in progress, still being made, rather than long since concluded and filed. It was a small thing to say. It felt, in the particular acoustics of her own chest, considerably larger. Samuel received this with the same quality of attention he gave everything genuine, unguarded, without the performance of significance. Then he looked at the root vegetable on the edge of his bowl and said, I'm going to report this to someone. I haven't decided who yet either. She laughed. It was the second time. It arrived the same way it had the first time, unannounced, unguarded, real, and the commissary around them did what it had done before, which was to briefly forget what it was doing and simply register that it had heard something it had not expected to hear. The woman who was absolutely not listening smiled at her soup. The man in the gray uniform looked up. The one beside him, maintaining his position of scientific neutrality, made a small note that the data was developing in an interesting direction. 3 weeks into what the station had quietly begun referring to as the situation at Table 9, Samuel brought a thermos. Ellie looked at the thermos. It was a standard-issue station thermos, the kind distributed to maintenance personnel for long shifts in sections where the nearest dispenser was 3 corridors away, and the air tasted like recycled ambition. It was silver, dented in one place in the way of objects that have been useful for a long time, and it had a small piece of adhesive tape on the side on which someone had written, in very small and very deliberate letters, Tuesday sauce, Thursday edition. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. I had a conversation with the kitchen supervisor, he said, with the tone of a man reporting on a completed engineering project. Her name is Dara. She was initially resistant to the concept. We reached an agreement. What kind of agreement? Ellie said. I fixed the atmospheric recirculator in the kitchen storage room that has been making a sound she described as like something dying slowly and with opinions, he said. In exchange, she provided the sauce on a non-Tuesday basis under the condition that I never tell anyone where it came from, which I am currently not doing because I am simply presenting you with a thermos of unspecified warm liquid. Ellie looked at the thermos. She looked at him. Something moved through her expression that was more complex than the precondition of a smile, something that had more weather in it, more history, the look of someone receiving a small and specific kindness, and not quite knowing, after a long time of not receiving them, where to put it. She put it, after a moment, somewhere that looked like composure, because composure was the container she had available, and it was, at least, reliable. "Thank you," she said, with the precise weight of someone who means the words in their full dimension rather than their social function. "The recirculator was genuinely terrible," he said. "I would have fixed it anyway." He paused. "I would not have thought of the sauce anyway. That part required you." Around them, the commissary had completed its recalibration in the way of slow institutional changes. Not through any single moment, but through the accumulation of Tuesdays and Thursdays, until the new arrangement had simply become part of the station's working understanding of itself. The radius had contracted, not disappeared. There remained a respectful and somewhat nervous margin, but contracted into something that read less like avoidance and more like the ordinary social distance people maintain around a table that is clearly occupied by a conversation they are not part of. The woman who had declared the situation extremely her business had introduced herself to Ellie on a Wednesday in the corridor near the observation deck. Her name was Petra. She was a cartographer mapping the station's outer sensor grid, and she had opened the conversation by saying that she wanted Ellie to know that she personally found the whole avoidance situation embarrassing on behalf of the station, and that she hoped it hadn't given her a poor impression of the place generally. Ellie had told her that her impression of the place had been undergoing revision. Petra had seemed pleased by this in the uncomplicated way of someone who likes to see things go right. "She asked about you," Ellie said to Samuel, pouring a measure of Tuesday sauce onto the Thursday pilaf with the careful satisfaction of someone correcting an injustice. "Petra," he said. He had met Petra on Tuesday when she had simply sat down at the adjacent table and introduced herself to both of them as though this were a thing that had always been available, and she had simply been waiting for the right moment. Samuel had found her immediately likable in the way of people who take up exactly the amount of space they mean to take up and no more. "She wanted to know if you were always like this," Ellie said. "Like what?" he said. Ellie considered the question with the honesty it deserved, which was considerable. "She used the word unbothered," she said. "I told her I believed it was less a quality you performed and more a feature of how you are constructed." Samuel tried his pilaf, which was improved significantly by the sauce, and considered this. "My mother would say I was dropped on my head as a child and landed in a way that rearranged my sense of what to worry about," he said. "I think she means it affectionately. I've decided to take it affectionately." "And what do you worry about?" Ellie asked. It was a direct question. She had been, she noticed, asking more of them, the careful, testing quality of her early sentences giving way gradually to something more like directness. The way a person moves from stepping carefully on ice to walking when the ice has proven, consistently and over time, to hold. He was quiet for a moment in the uncommon way he was sometimes quiet, the way that meant he was giving the question the specific gravity it had asked for rather than the first available answer. "Getting things wrong when it matters," he said. "Not noticing something I should have noticed. The level 6 ventilation situation before I fixed it was genuinely keeping me up at night." He looked at her. People being alone when they don't want to be. The commissary moved around them in its ordinary way, trays and voices, and the particular hum of a life support system, maintaining the conditions for human and near-human life against the considerable indifference of space. Ellie's long ears caught all of it, the full frequency range of a station going about its day, and underneath it, close and warm and immediate, the sound of Samuel eating Thursday pilaf with Tuesday sauce from a dented thermos that had his handwriting on the side. "I have not wanted to be alone," she said, "for considerably longer than 4 months." He looked at her with the open, unguarded attention that was, she had come to understand, simply the way he looked at things he valued. He did not fill the sentence with anything. He let it be what it was, large and true, and finally said, and then he offered her the thermos, because there was more sauce, and she hadn't had any yet. The parking dispute in docking Bay 7 was resolved on a Thursday. Ellie heard about it from Petra, who had been peripherally involved in the negotiations in the capacity of someone who had been mapping the outer sensor grid, and had therefore produced the only accurate spatial diagram of the bay's actual dimensions, which turned out to be 14% larger than the figure both diplomatic delegations had been arguing over for 11 months. The discovery did not make either delegation happy in the way that being right makes people happy, because it meant that both of them had been wrong, which is a different and considerably less satisfying experience. They signed the new allocation agreement in the commissary at a table near the eastern dispensers, and the station administrator sent a message to all personnel that read, in its entirety, "The Bay 7 situation has concluded. Please adjust your expectations accordingly." Samuel read the message in the Level 4 maintenance corridor and sent Ellie a response that said only, "Does this mean the diplomatic team will start eating in the commissary now? Because I have thoughts about the table situation." She read it at her workstation in the diplomatic annex where she had, 6 days ago, accepted a provisional advisory position with the station's interspecies liaison office, a development that had emerged from a conversation with the station administrator who had, it turned out, been quietly aware that she was wasting a resource of considerable diplomatic experience by allowing it to eat pilaf alone for 4 months. The administrator was a practical woman. She had made the offer with the directness of someone who does not enjoy inefficiency, and had been genuinely pleased when Ellie accepted with the directness of someone who had recently been reminded that available things can be taken. Ellie sent back, "I have managed the table situation for 4 months. I am confident in my methodology." His response arrived in under a minute. "Your methodology involved sitting alone. I'm suggesting we expand the dataset." She looked at the message for a moment with the expression she had stopped trying to contain, the one that lived at the corner of her mouth and had been making increasingly frequent appearances since a man had sat down across from her and said something honest about bread. Then she sent, Tuesday, 12:40. He sent back, "I'll bring the thermos." The commissary on the day of the Bay 7 resolution had the particular energy of a place where something has ended and people are still deciding how to feel about it. The diplomatic teams occupied 2 tables near the window with the careful, exhausted proximity of people who have been arguing for almost a year and have not yet figured out what to do with the absence of the argument. They ate in the specific silence of a concluded conflict, which is quieter than ordinary silence and considerably more complicated. Ellie arrived at 12:38. She sat down at table 9. Which was no longer identified in anyone's mind as the table to avoid, but simply as the table where Ellie sat, which was a distinction that had taken 4 months and one unbothered maintenance technician to establish. Petra was already at the adjacent table with her sensor grid maps spread beside her tray, eating with one hand and annotating with the other in the way of someone for whom the boundary between working and not working has become entirely theoretical. "The Bay 7 people look tired," Petra said, without looking up from her maps. 11 months is a long time to be wrong about dimensions," Ellie said. "I tried to tell them in month 3, Petra said. "Nobody wants to hear that from the cartographer. They think you're taking sides." She finally looked up. "Samuel is late." "He is not late," Ellie said. "It is 12:39. "For him that's late," Petra said, with the authority of someone who has been paying attention. Samuel came through the dispensary line at 12:41, carrying his tray and the dented thermos. And when he sat down, he looked at Ellie with the open expression she had long since stopped cataloging as anomalous and had simply begun to recognize as his, the specific quality of attention he brought to things he found worth attending to. And she understood, with the clear and uncluttered certainty of someone who has processed a thing for long enough that it has finally finished processing, that she had been found worth attending to, not despite what she was, not in careful negotiation with it, but inclusive of all of it. The long ears and the white skin and the blood compounds from level 2, and the 4 months of deliberate solitude that had turned out to be not an ending, but an unusually long Tuesday before the sauce arrived. "The Bay 7 teams are in here," he said, looking around. "The dispute concluded this morning," she said. He looked at them with the thoughtful expression of someone assembling a picture from its available pieces. "They don't look relieved," he said. "They spent 11 months being certain," she said. "Certainty is comfortable even when it's wrong. Being right is a poor substitute for the certainty you've lost." He poured Tuesday sauce onto Thursday pilaf, passed the thermos to her, and said, "Is that diplomatic wisdom or personal experience?" She accepted the thermos. Outside the commissary's high windows, Herath Station turned its slow rotation against the dark, and the stars held their positions with the reliable permanence of things that have been there long enough to be trusted. And somewhere in the docking bay below them a parking dispute had ended, and at table 9 the radius was gone, not contracted, not negotiated, simply gone, replaced by 2 trays and a dented thermos and Petra pretending to look at her maps. And Ellie said, with the full and unguarded honesty of someone who has finally found the register and found it, against all expectation, not only still available but better than she remembered, both. He smiled at her across the table. She let him.